All right, good morning. So I know it's a little bit early. I just wanted to be sure that you can hear and see me. And it looks like I don't really have a way to discover if you can. I'm going to try here, checking on my phone. So if you could, if you're watching, good morning. We're going to do our St. Joseph Bible study here in a few minutes after I do a quick sound check and make sure that I can get comments here. All right, very good. All right. I can get comments here. Okay, so it looks like Victoria is the only one here today so far. But I am a little bit early, so I wanted to do a quick sound check, and it looks like the video is on, the sound is on, so I'm going to give it just a couple of minutes more just to get everybody in. Make sure we have video and sound, which I can see that we do. So welcome. We're about to begin in about 2 minutes. We're going to begin our St. Joseph Bible study with our Ave Maria Press Catholic Note-Taking Bible, brand new release over there, which I absolutely love. Lots of room to take notes, which we are going to need because I'm going to give you a whole lot of stuff. I don't know if you have ever done a study with me before, then you know that it's a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. So you're going to need notes. So I hope you're ready. So our St. Joseph study, I am the Bible Study Evangelista, Sonja Corbitt, and I'm here with CatholicMom.com and Ave Maria Press for the Note-Taking Bible. We'll begin our St. Joseph Bible study here in about 1 minute. I'm just making sure, there's Tara, just making sure. Very good. Okay, I didn't realize I could see comments there. Okay, so I'm just making sure we have sound and video, that I can see comments, and I can. So as soon as the clock hits 10 o'clock, I will begin. I hope you have your Bibles, because you're going to need them. All right, I am Sonja Corbitt, the Bible Study Evangelista, here with CatholicMom.com and Ave Maria Press, and their new Note-Taking Bible. We are doing a study here on St. Joseph. It'll be about 3 weeks long, and I just want to warn you, if you've ever done a study with me, then you know that it's like drinking from a fire hose, and that's because there's just so much good stuff, and I can't always fit it all in. So what I'm planning to do today is give you the highlights, first of all, of the whole 3-week study, which we will be doing 3 weeks on Wednesdays, beginning at 10 o'clock every week here on CatholicMom.com, here on the Facebook Live. And I will be doing a study on St. Joseph for the year of St. Joseph as priest, prophet, and king of the Holy Family and prince of the church. So today I'm going to give you, well, actually every week, since I only have about 20-25 minutes, they're not going to go any longer than 25 minutes out of respect for your time. But there's so much information that I want to share. I just want to let you know that everything will also be available on my own website, BibleStudyEvangelista.com, where I'll be offering an in-depth 1-hour study on all of this material. I'm giving you the highlights here each week, but then we'll go into far more depth over on my page. So St. Joseph, I have to tell you that in March, he just walked into my life really, really large. And I had no idea at that time that he had really been involved with me from the very beginning, and that was actually part of what he showed me. But I'll tell you that I came to St. Joseph in the same way that I came to Mary. So I'm a convert from the Baptist church, and we didn't have relationships with saints. And so I was a convert for a couple of years and went to confession with my bishop, and he told me that the measure of my Catholicism is the measure of my relationship to Mary. And I was like, Bishop, that's not what I'm here for. And it bothered me, but that was the beginning of my relationship with her, because I came into the church under a whole lot of tension and stress, and it was very, very difficult. So I didn't come into the Catholic Church to be half a Catholic. So I began then a pursuit of understanding Mary individually. So personally, I began to attempt a personal relationship with her. And a couple of years later then, this year, in March, I was asked to do some talks on St. Joseph at St. Joseph's Catholic Church in March on the feast day of St. Joseph in the year of St. Joseph. And so I just felt like, okay, wow, he is really getting my attention here. So I came to Joseph in the same way that I came to Mary. So it was Jesus, Mary, Joseph, just like they say, JMJ with the little cross or the crucifix there. So I just went to him and I said, just like I did with Mary, I said, so St. Joseph, clearly you are interested in getting my attention and you'd like for me to know some things about you. So what is it that you would really like me to know? And what he showed me absolutely blew me away. It has changed my life forever. I will never be the same, because what I realized is that he had been present with me all along as the daddy that I gave up believing that I would ever have. And in a healthy way, because it's just true. I talk about my father wound a lot, and I at some point realized that I was hoping and wishing for something that just was not possible. And so I grieved that for a long time, and then I just gave it up. And then, of course, I went through that process of healing with God, and then I no longer wished for it because I realized it was not going to be possible. And then St. Joseph showed me who he has been in my life all along, and it began with my husband. So I alluded to the very difficult time I had coming into the Catholic Church, and part of that involved my marriage. I came in first, and my husband and I could not talk about Catholicism at all. We would fight, and so we just didn't talk about it. And it was very difficult for him for a lot of reasons that I don't have time to go into right now, but here is the pertinent point. So a couple of months after I had come into the church, he was getting some persecution from the people that he worked with. We're down here in the South in Tennessee. Can you tell? And so he was experiencing a whole lot of pressure and tension and persecution, and I just felt so sorry for him. We could not talk about it. It was so difficult to watch him be so hurt and miserable and conflicted, and it was just so hard to watch. And we typically, our Sundays are a family day, and so we were taking a walk with the kids, and I just, I felt so bad. It was a Sunday, and the kids and I had gone to Mass, and so after Mass, to which my husband did not go, he had completely stopped going to church altogether once the kids and I were all Catholic. He just quit going to the Baptist church and wouldn't come with us to the Catholic church. So he didn't go to church at all. And we were walking that Sunday, and I told him, I looked at him, and I said, honey, you remind me of Joseph, of St. Joseph. And he said, what did you say? And he stopped in the middle of the street. And I said, you remind me of St. Joseph? And he said, you're not going to believe what happened to me today. And he meant while we were at church. He said, I was sitting on the John, and God said to me, you are Joseph. And I about fell out because I had been clinging to Mary throughout that entire process of my coming into the Catholic Church, because she remained soft and silent in the midst of all of this, the questioning and everything that must have occurred around her pregnancy and the incarnation. And here was God. I saw this as an intervention by the Holy Spirit, which it clearly was. Now I know, though, that this is part of what Joseph wanted me to know about him, that was actually Joseph himself. He was providing for me through my husband, And of course, the Holy Spirit and Jesus facilitate all this stuff, right? But that was the beginning. Now, I had no idea about this at the time. But back in March, when all of this sort of began with me searching to understand who St. Joseph is, that was one of the very first things he showed me, was that he personally has been present in my life. Oh, I guess it's because of the father thing. I get so overwhelmed about it. I almost can't speak. It is just so deeply, deeply personal to me. So I'm going to quit all my bawling, and we're going to look at some of what I learned in the scriptures, because I don't have a lot of time. But I wanted to tell you that because I just wanted to show you that this is where it all began, really, for me. So in the Catechism, it tells us in 436 that Christ, which means anointed or Messiah, he fulfilled the messianic hope of Israel in his threefold office of priest, prophet, and king. So Jesus then fulfills those Old Testament roles of priest, prophet, and king. But he learned how to do that in part. Of course, he learned it from the scriptures, but he also learned it in part by watching his legal father, St. Joseph, his model. And so St. Joseph then was the priest, prophet, and king of the Holy Family, that little domestic, we'll call it a little domestic church. And he, in order to understand stuff, we'll say, about St. Joseph, you really need to go back to the Old Testament and look at the patriarch Joseph from the Old Testament. And we do that in part because St. Bernardine of Siena said that the patriarchs all terminated in St. Joseph. Now, the patriarchs are, we'll say, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then all of Jacob's sons, the 12 tribes, the sons through whom came the 12 tribes. And that patriarch word involves both fatherhood and priesthood. And that's true because fatherhood and priesthood go together. In the Old Testament, before Moses, before the golden calf at the foot of Mount Sinai and all of that stuff, priesthood came through the father. And so every father was a priest. Every and we're talking about sort of in a lay, not in an institutional priesthood kind of way, right? We're talking about the priesthood of a family. And so Adam then was the first priest, and so on. So Abraham, whom I wish we had time to look at, and we don't today, but he was then the great patriarch. Jesus says so in chapter 8 of John, when he says to the Pharisees, "You are of your father the devil. We are of our father Abraham." Right? So Abraham is the father of faith for all of God's people. First, the Jewish people. He was called the first Hebrew, or he was from Ebir, right? Which was, he's the first Hebrew. Not in a national sense, but that's what he's called in the Old Testament. And so before Moses, before there was an institutional priesthood, the priesthood came through the father. And so that's part of why we talk about this patriarch idea. Now, let me just say, patriarchy is a dirty word for a lot of people, and it shouldn't be, because this is a cultural thing, or a religious thing. I'm sorry. It's not meant to be cultural when we talk about it in the church. It's religious, right? And so the fatherhood and the priesthood are inseparably linked. And so when we see in the book of Acts, chapter 7, so you're going to want to write these notes down in your note-taking Bible, right? So what I would do is turn to Genesis chapter 37, because that's where we're going to look at Joseph here in just a moment. And then make a note there about Acts chapter 7, verses 9 through 16, because we have a list of the patriarchs there, and Joseph is listed as one of those patriarchs. And then also in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 17 through 22, in verse 22, we have Joseph listed as a patriarch as well. So he was a patriarch of the Old Testament. And then they all terminated in St. Joseph, Jesus' legal father. So that's why we're looking at all this. And in order to understand in order to understand St. Joseph's role, we have to go back to the original Joseph, the Old Testament Joseph, right? And that way we get lots of information on our St. Joseph, our father, our foster father in the faith. And for me, I like to call him Papa now, because I'm telling you, he has revealed himself in my life in a way that is just completely overwhelming. So what I want to do now is talk about Old Testament Joseph, because there are more chapters dedicated in the Bible to Old Testament Joseph than any other single person except for Jesus. Isn't that interesting? So many chapters, almost, the whole rest of the book of Genesis really almost is dedicated to St. Joseph. So if you turn to chapter 37 of Genesis. Now, we don't have time to go through all this here. We're going to do it in my weekly Bible study over at BibleStudyEvangelista.com. So you can go over there and sign up for the weekly email, and you'll get each week's show. It's probably going to be about 5 or 6 weeks, because I just don't have the time to go into it all here with you. But I want to hit the high spots so you'll know this really cool stuff about our St. Joseph, the patron of the church. So if you look at chapter 37 of Genesis here, I'm in my Ave Maria Press Note-Taking Bible, right? And so in chapter 37, we don't have time to read it all. There's so many chapters dedicated to Joseph. So instead, what we do is we look at the chapter and the paragraph headings listed here. So first you see Joseph dreams dreams of greatness. Then Joseph is sold by his brothers. Judah and Tamar, which is kind of a parenthesis in that whole story, that it doesn't really have a whole lot to do with Joseph himself. It has more to do with his brother Judah. And then we see in chapter 39, Joseph and Potiphar's wife, dreams and of 2 prisoners in chapter 40. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream in 41. Joseph's rise to power in Egypt. Joseph's brothers go to Egypt. And then the whole story of what happens in Egypt and all of that. So here are the main points. Joseph was Jacob's son. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You hear that, those 3 names put together all the time. They are those patriarchs through whom the promise of the Messiah would come. Abraham was called as the father of faith, and his son was Isaac. Isaac's son was Jacob. Jacob's sons were the 12 tribes, and Joseph was the next to the youngest, next to the last youngest, next to the youngest. So Benjamin was the youngest, and Joseph was the next youngest. And Joseph held a very special place in Jacob's heart, partly because he was the youngest son, but also because he was the son of Leah, Rachel, whom he waited for 14 years to marry. He had to marry Rachel first, and then he married Leah. I got them backwards. He married Leah first, and then he married Rachel. Rachel was the one he really loved, and Rachel had 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin, and then she died. Okay, so Joseph is the one that we hear Dolly Parton's song, "The Coat of Many Colors," right? That's Joseph. And then that Disney movie, The Prince of Egypt, all of that. We're talking about that Joseph, okay? Now, I got to hurry because we only have 10 minutes left. But Jacob was himself a dreamer. Jacob dreamed the dream of the ladder, Jacob's ladder, right? And because of that, he was very interested in Joseph's dreams. We saw that in the paragraph headings here in these chapters. Joseph's name means one who increases, or adding, or to increase. And so it's sort of like an accounting term, which I don't have time to build on. We'll do that in the other study. But Joseph's rank as the youngest, his dreaming about being favored or having this birthright authority over his brothers was way out of order. And that's part of why they got so angry. Partly because Jacob favored Joseph, but also because Joseph was having these dreams of greatness, right? And he was going to be lord over all his brothers, and even Jacob was disturbed by all of this because it got the whole family hierarchy out of order. The heir was the firstborn son, and Joseph was next to last, okay? And yet he was having all these dreams. He had a double dream, actually, of being some sort of lord over his father even, and the rest of the sons. So that was very out of order. It was insulting, and it also violated the customs of that time, all right? And so we see this really great picture in all of these chapters here on Joseph in the book of Genesis of this really dysfunctional family, because what happens is his brothers sell him. He comes out to check on him because Jacob sent him to the fields where they were shepherding, and they sell him to a bunch of Gentiles in a caravan, a camel caravan that was headed, well, in a caravan, right? So they sell him, they threw him in a pit, and then they sold him, and then he is taken to Egypt, and he starts out in this Egyptian officer's home, Potiphar, and then Potiphar's wife she's attracted to Joseph, right? So she wants him to lay with her, and he won't do it, and she grabs a hold of his cloak, and he jumps out of it and runs off, and then she accuses him of rape and all of this stuff, and so he is thrown into prison by Potiphar. So then he's in the dungeon in this prison, and while he's in prison, these two other Egyptian officers have a couple of dreams themselves, and Joseph interprets those dreams for them. And one of them is going to die, he says, and the other will be released, he says, and it comes true. One of those dreams, one of those officers, one was a baker, and one was, I like to say the baker and the candlestick maker, but that's not the case. One was a baker, and I think the other was the cupbearer or something like that, which we'll look into in detail in the other in-depth study. But he interprets these two dreams, and one of them is indeed executed, and the other is released and elevated back into the court of the Egyptian Pharaoh. And so years go by, and poor Joseph, he's done this favor, and he tells the guy, and when you're released, remember me. And he promptly forgot about Joseph until Pharaoh had a dream. Now, you get this string of dream things, this pattern of dreaming and interpretation of dreams and all that. I can't wait to tell you all of that. But Joseph then, I think it's the baker who was released, and so he tells Pharaoh, I know a guy that can interpret this dream. And so Pharaoh calls for Joseph, and Joseph goes to Pharaoh. He hears the dream, he interprets the dream, and it sits so well with Pharaoh. Pharaoh elevates him to the second in the entire Egyptian kingdom. Now, these are the same Egyptians that built the pyramids and King Tut and all of that stuff we think of when we think of Egyptians. This was an enormous civilization at that time. And this is how the people of God ended up enslaved, because Joseph was the first in Egypt. And he was taken there, according to Psalms, which I'd love for you to turn there. In Psalm 105, it says, when God summoned a famine on the land. You need to write that down. Psalm 105, let's see, let me check my notes. Verses, I actually started highlighting in verse 16 through verse 20. It sort of gives us a little summary. But there's a famine. Joseph, he foretells a famine in Egypt to Pharaoh, and he says, look, you better plan for this. You need to plan for 7 years, harvest then for 7 years afterward, and that way the whole land will have food. And it comes true. So Joseph then is put in charge of all the food for the entire land of Egypt. And so for 7 years, while the harvest is plenty, he gathers and stores 7 years worth of grain, of wheat. And then there are 7 years of famine. And during that famine, Joseph's brothers and his father, all of them are experiencing this famine, and they need food. So they have to go to Egypt, and they don't recognize Joseph when they get there, because Joseph has been clean-shaven, and he's adopted the language of the Egyptians and some of the cultural ways of the Egyptians, although he never abandoned his faith. And so when the sons of Jacob get there, Joseph's brothers, they don't recognize him. And here he has his moment of revenge, right? So we see then that Joseph he is thrown in the pit, and then he goes to Potiphar, and then he goes to prison, and then he rises to prominence, exactly as his dreams as a young boy told him would occur. So he had this gift of foretelling. And we see in Psalm 106 that when God summoned a famine on the land and broke every staff of bread, which means the staffs of wheat, he sent a man ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold a slave. His feet were hurt with shackles, his neck was put in a collar of iron, until what he said came to pass. The word of God tested him. The king sent and released him. The ruler of the peoples set him free. He made him lord of all his house, which we'll come back to when we look at St. Joseph in depth, and ruler of all his possessions, to instruct his princes at his pleasure, and to teach the elders wisdom. So God then sent Joseph ahead in order to preserve the Messianic line, this family, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all of the sons. And Joseph was the one sent ahead. And of course, all of these terrible things befall him. He's there for like 13 years, and all of his dreaming came to nothing. And yet, the whole time, God was using this to prepare, to preserve the whole family of God, through which the lineage of Christ would come. And so also St. Joseph. Now, what's that got to do with fatherhood? Well, because the Old Testament Joseph was a patriarch, and St. Joseph is the termination of all the patriarchs, there is a sense in which Joseph, St. Joseph, was also a priest in that way, priest and father. So foster father, but still father of Christ, of Jesus, foster father, and then priest of his household, in the way of the Old Testament, the way it was before the sin of the golden calf at Mount Sinai, which I don't have time to go into. But it remained that every father, and this is why we talk about fathers being the priest of their domestic church, even now, fatherhood then comes with it. There comes a priesthood with it. And so, man, I wish I had time. I don't. So I have to close out. Joseph then, the just, is priest of the Holy Family. He, as a priest, he brings Mary, who is pregnant, to the tower of the flock in Bethlehem, the Migdal Eder, which, write this down, is in Micah 4, verse 8, talks about the tower of the flock, or the Migdal Eder, which we'll look at in the longer study. But that's the first priestly act that Joseph, well, not the first, but one of the first priestly acts that Joseph performed as the priest of the Holy Family, because the shepherds at the Migdal Eder around that area in Bethlehem, they were priestly shepherds. They were in charge of the lambs that would be sacrificed in the temple. Can you believe that? And so that Migdal Eder, that was one of the things that Joseph facilitated. He brought Mary to that Migdal Eder according to the prophecy in Micah chapter 4, verse 8. And then we have his protection of the Ark of the Covenant, who is Mary herself. That was a priestly duty. Then we have the fatherhood of Joseph. According to the fatherhood, the patriarchy of Joseph of the Old Testament, but even further back than that, Abraham, which we'll look at in detail. Then we have Joseph as prophet, which you wouldn't normally think of because Joseph is silent in the scriptures, St. Joseph. He doesn't say anything, so we don't hear him in his own words, and yet he is a prophet because of his dreams. And those are according to his previous father, Joseph, in the Old Testament. Isn't that cool? And then we have Joseph, king of the Holy Family, and that has to do with that title that he has, Key of the Old Testament, which is why the church calls St. Joseph the prince over all his possessions. The key to that is Joseph as well, which I don't have time to develop, but we see this prophecy in the book of Ezekiel of another administrator of another kingdom that is prophetic of how St. Joseph then will be the prince over all of God's possessions, right? And so that first of all means the Holy Family, but then later on it also means the entire Catholic Church. So St. Joseph then is priest and in that father. So priest and father, prophet and king of the Holy Family and prince of the entire church. Is that not absolutely fabulous? There is so much here. I don't have time to do any more, so I at least gave you the highlights. And I hope to see you then for next week. I'm going to go ahead and sign off because we're almost 30 minutes in, and I'm sorry I went long. I'm Sonja Corbitt, the Bible Study Evangelista. Thank you for joining me.